you guys. So I got a lot of requests for baseball books, and we have quite a few at the library, so you can definitely look online and see what interests you directly. But for today's purposes, I chose one of the most famous baseball figures of all time, Babe Ruth, and we have quite a few books on him as well. This is one of my favorites. It's Babe Ruth and the World He Created, and it's called The Big Fella by Jane Levy. And what's interesting about this book is it really shows why Babe Ruth was so loved by everyone. He was, a little background on him, he was born um, and basically lost his parents. There was tuberculosis and a lot of other bad things going around, so he was an orphan, and he was an orphan for a very long time. And at his orphanage, they believed in organized sports, so they taught him how to play baseball. And a scout came and saw him play, and the day that they signed him, they had to assign him a legal guardian from that orphanage on that day, just so that guardian could sign his baseball contract legally, because he was a minor. So because of his background, he took a heavy interest in minority groups and special needs. So basically orphans, people of color, different ethnicities, everybody, he was definitely on their side and showed it and was very public about it. And that's why, one of the reasons he's so loved by so many people. So during this time, they would do stunts to try to get in the newspapers, to try to get advertising, to get people to come to the games, and also as fundraisers. And so I'm going to read to you one of the fundraisers he did that was organized by a guy who made his living catching vegetables in his mouth that were tossed outside of buildings. That's how he made his living. So stay in school, because you want to have better options than that. The guy who did that, who organized this stunt, lost all his teeth eventually to a large turnip, but he still stayed in the game of doing promotions. So there's the background. Let me just read you a few pages from this. So, The Big Fella by Jane Levy. It was 4 days after the first talkie, The Jazz Singer, opened at the Warner's Theater in New York. 6 days after, sculptors began chiseling George Washington's nose on Mount Rushmore, and 12 days after, the big fella had made good on his New Year's pledge to Yankee owner Colonel Jacob Rupert, which had been bannered across the top of the New York Telegram, "I promise 60 homers to Jake." It was an audacious promise, considering he hadn't hit as many as 50 since 1921. One he made up while living it up in Hollywood between vaudeville engagements and movie negotiations, and most notably before coming to terms with Rupert on a 1927 contract. But the Babe made good, circling the bases on the afternoon of September 30, doffing his cap, bowing, grinning, winking. Ruth crowed, "60, count 'em 60. Let's see some other son of a bitch do that." Bedini, who put an end to his vegetable catching days after sacrificing all his front teeth to a 1-pound turnip, had a particular appreciation for the showman Ruth had become, and sheer gameness of the man. More than anyone, Bedini was in a position to grasp the difficulty of the stunt Ruth pulled off on behalf of citizens' military training camps the previous July, when Christy Walsh stationed him on a dusty Long Island airfield to try to set a world record for catching a baseball dropped from an airplane, a record Walsh invented for Ruth to break. Walsh could do just about anything to align his Rapscallion charge with what he called pure Americanism of the horse and buggy sort, and divert attention from his less savory ways. He posed the Babe in a lot of woolen military garb, in this instance at high noon on the same airfield where Lucky Lindy would take off for Paris 10 months later. It took 7 tries, with Ruth darting about the empty field in the blistering sun and the propellers kicking up tornadoes of dust that obfuscated everything but the man on the ground and the plane in the sky. Walsh really put one over for the Babe that day, as he liked to say. Of his best PR stunts, the Daily News showed up as well as a newsreel cameraman. The New York Times played the story on page 1. There was no suggestion in the unsigned Times Dispatch, dating July 22, 1926, that Ruth intentionally ducked the first 2 balls bombed at him from 1,000 feet up, which Major General Benjamin Foulis, chief of the U.S. Army Air Corps, claimed knocked him flat. The newsreel cameras missed that. Then the pilot descended to 300 feet and Ruth gloved the ball. There he was, down on one knee in the grass, making eye contact with the lens as the plane soared out of the frame. He looked like a supplicant, asking for what? Attention? Approval? Or maybe just to get the hell out of there? Gee, it's like trying to stop a bullet, Ruth told the military men, who may or may not have appreciated the analogy. After dutifully turning over the record-setting ball to Fuldos, signing a bat for the best athlete at each of the citizens' military training camps, and enjoying a much-needed bath in the officers' club, Ruth had returned to Yankee Stadium in time for a 3 p.m. game in which he went 2-5 with a triple and a stolen base. On October 10th, 1927, he was the most famous man in America. Who wanted to be famous, that is? Charlie Chaplin and Charles Lindbergh could give him a run for his money, but the little tramp with whom Babe was known to play an occasional game of tennis on his court in Hollywood wasn't homegrown, and Lindy preferred higher altitudes to the fleshy business of being loved at field level. For Ruth, the visit to Providence that afternoon was a homecoming and a measuring stick of just how much had changed since the summer of 1914, when he'd spent 6 weeks with the Grays pitching them to the International League Championship and hitting his first professional home run. He was 19 then and just 5 months removed from his final parole from St. Mary's Orphanage. This was a different Babe, more portly, more famous, but no less genial, the Journal attested. As a matter of fact, between the boys and the chorus girls gathered around him at the plate, the Babe seemed to give preference to the boys. They knew all about him, or thought they did. He was an orphan. He grew up in an orphanage, didn't he? Or an incorrigible sentence to St. Mary's, where the court sent boys to straighten out. The brothers and baseball had imposed order on his rowdy soul. He was the guy who ate so many hot dogs he ended up in the hospital. The guy who drove Packards into ditches and climbed out smiling. The guy arrested for speeding who got a police escort from jail in time to bat in the 6th inning at the Polo Grounds. He was the Babe, the Bam, the Big Bam, the Great Bambino, or Slambino. The Bazoo of Bang and Bash, Behemoth of Biff, Bust, and Bangs, Blunderbuss, the bulky Monarch, and the Monarch of Swatum, Caliph of Clout, Colossum of Club, and vice versa, the Circuit Smasher, Demon Swatter, Diamond-Studded Ballbuster, His Eminence, the Priest of SWAT, G. Herman Hercules, and Pan Hercules, the Goliath of Grand Slam and the Great Kegel of Clout, Hejaz of Hit, Herman the Great, and Homeric Herman, Infant of Swattergy, Kid of Crash, King of Clout, King of Swing, the Home Run King, the Maharaja and Mauler of MASH, the Mauling Menace, Monarch, the Mastodon, also the Mandarin of Maul and Mastonic Mauler, the Modern Beowulf, Paladin of Punch, Prince of Ash, and Podonite of Pounders, the Raha of Rap, Sheik of Slam, Sakim of Slug, the Samson and Sultan of SWAT, the Swattiest Swatter of Swattum, the Terrible Titan, the Titan of Thump, Wazir of Wham, Wally of Wallop, and Wizard of Whack, Jidge, Jedge, George, the big fella. And all the names put together were still not enough to encompass the idea of him. Maybe a few of the older men in the crowd had caught a glimpse of him in 1914 when he was young and lithe and just growing into his name. Maybe some of the younger ones had tried one of his candy bars, or worn one of his Babe Ruth sweaters for boys, or seen one of his movies, or heard his voice on the new radio set in the living room. All summer long, in American League cities, boys played hooky, jumped turnstiles, scaled lumber yards, and otherwise evaded flat-footed coppers, pleading with indulgent fathers to let them see for themselves. Roger Angell, who grew up to be the Babe Ruth of baseball writers, was one of the lucky ones, whose father took him to see the Great Bambino at Yankee Stadium. I heard about Babe Ruth, he said. I read about Babe Ruth. I remember looking for him, and there he was. He was instantly verified. It was stunning, the creature I'd heard about. He didn't look like anybody else in the whole world. The monkey-swollen body tapering down to the ankles. I once called them debutante ankles. Everything about him was absolutely extraordinary, starting with his name. The first name was baby and the second name was a girl's, which suggested to me the complexity of the world. He was so available. You got on the subway, paid a nickel, and there he would be in right field. The other thing I remember is not him hitting a home run, but him swinging and missing, his whole body swiveled to face the first base stand. Here was a man who kept promises, who exulted in making them and daring himself to keep them. It would take until the second to last day of the season to make good on his New Year's pledge to Jake Rupert, but make good he did. And then they caught a picture of him catching that ball from a plane 300 feet in the air, and this is that picture. Could you imagine? Anyway, if you're interested, I highly recommend this book. It will be back at the library by the time this is posted. And please, please follow your interests, because that's where you're going to find some really good literature.